processing on GitHub. Because GitHub Copilot was constructed at a per user level before we understood even the intensity of usage of agents, right? It was an interactive way for a developer to use code complete, maybe tasks. It was not like, oh, I launched 10,000 agents that are going on all day, right? So that is what the adjustment is about. So now that we really want, there will always be a per user, but there will have to be a consumption meter.
How do you think about the durability of SaaS more generally? One thing I've observed is in a lot of enterprises internally, there will be teams that almost have agent euphoria. They're so excited about the explosion of things they can build that they're trying to rebuild a lot of applications or going to their SaaS vendors and saying, we're not going to work with you anymore, or we're considering an internal project. And it seems like in 6 to 9 months, maybe some of those people will come back and say, actually, we can't rebuild everything. How do you think about what's durable in this world and what isn't?
I think we have to go through one full budget cycle on this to really see the sort of the emergence of the equilibrium. Because at the end of the day, there's marginal cost to even generating the app, right? In fact, there can be even a simple way to say it, like if you should always acquire something if the marginal cost of building and maintaining something on your own is higher, right? That should be like it's a quantifiable, right? A quantifiable thing. And the maintenance part is important, right? Even like you got to remember, like, hey, all the security stuff that now AI will find, you better fix them too fast. Of course, there's a coding agent to help you with, but then that burns tokens, right? So whose responsibility is it? It's kind of like a cycle that you've got to think through. And I think we have gone through the excitement that I can generate a lot of software. I think the next thing would be, what software do I really want to generate? What software do I want to use from others? How do I compose these two into some agentic workflow that I have agency over, right? Because I think there'll be very little tolerance for anybody who's inflexible at the vendor level. But at the same time, I think that anyone who has got that flexibility, shows up, delivers the value, will be back at again, right? We're selling software, but with just different business models, in fact.
Speaking about building software, one of my favorite moments from, I think, a previous build, maybe 1 or 2 years ago, was there was a section of you building your own software. I'm curious if you're building anything now.
Yeah, so I think first of all, let's face it, right? Building software has made it possible for even the incompetence of a CEO of a company like ours, you can build. So thank God. But that said, I do feel that, something like GitHub Copilot to me, and especially the new Sessions app or the new app, has just made it so much more possible for you to have agency over artifacts that you felt you couldn't touch before, right? So for me as a CEO even, to go to a code base, to be able to learn about it. Like I remember joining Microsoft long back, first, and then you say, man, everybody had to go in and look at, whatever, Cutler's Malloc or what have you to learn how to do good C++ code. So now that ability to be more full stack up and down is so good. But that doesn't mean every one of us should be doing the same thing. The question is, how do you then have the ability to inspect things, learn things, see things? I think is just so much more. And so to me, what I'm building a lot of is these long-running Foundry agents, right? So there's autopilots. So the easiest thing is, to me, I think I just built one even last week where the idea was, hey, can I have an agent that is continuously monitoring essentially my own chief of staff autopilot, right? We're going to have that obviously in Scout. That's what we showed. But it is so easy and trivial to build. I took Work IQ. I said, take Work IQ, go and build a Foundry long-running agent, store all the memory in using Rayfin, right? Basically, have my backend as a service. And lo and behold, it built it. And not only built it, I could say publish to Teams, and it published the damn thing to Teams. So the ability to have some end-to-end project like this complete is just pretty miraculous.
How do you think that impacts the different types of engineering roles that exist in the future? Because right now, I think there's a dozen different types of engineers that you can be, from QA, front end, et cetera. There's a big swath. I've heard some people argue that in 4 or 5 years, we'll basically end up with 4 engineering roles. It'll be people who are managing agents. It'll be forward deployed engineers or FDEs. It'll be security engineers. And then people working on large-scale infrastructure for a small number of services. And then everything else just collapses into the agentic world.
Yeah,
Do you think that's a correct view of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll have to experiment our way through it. But what you said is there are some very at-scale things. At LinkedIn, they did structurally change and basically built up a new discipline called full stack builder, right? So they went and said, hey, let's bring people from design and product management, front-end engineering, all put them together, but also have an edge, right? It's not like the design person still doesn't have the design edge or the front-end person doesn't have the front-end edge, but you can give yourself bigger scope in roles so that you're not confined to one role. And then equally, infrastructure has become very critical, right? So in other words, RLEs, one thing we've realized is, even for the Excel team, for example, building the RLE in which a reward can be learned is actually one of the hardest sort of infrastructure problems. And so you kind of need even new talent, right? Distributed systems people, even in what was considered an end user app team, because it's a different skill set. So yes, infrastructure, science is the other one, obviously. So I think we'll see how these evolve, right? Where's the real, always the world will have a bunch of specialists. I think the generalist role is going to be the most exciting, right? Because the leverage of a generalist is where we are going to see the maximum returns, right? When you said, hey, are you coding? I'm now I basically translated knowledge work, right? Which I did, where I created a Word document or a spreadsheet or even, and now I can build an app. Right, it's in the same sentence, right? That idea that, oh wow, my generalist skills have gotten a higher leverage, I think is what we're going to see across the board.
Music to the ears of CEOs and VCs that are a little dangerous at a lot of
Golden
things.
age for idea people.
Idea people, man, with a lot of agency. If you take that idea of personal agency and you just zoom it out to the organizational context, my partner Mike Vernal, who actually started his career at Microsoft, just wrote an essay where one of the big takeaways is it's an age where you can be much more ambitious, and you need to be given the pace of the environment and how quickly actually users and companies are open to adopting new technologies. How do you think about, I feel silly asking this of somebody running a $1 trillion plus company already, but how do you think about how Microsoft can be more ambitious now?
It's a great question. I think the thing in these type of transitions is to have a conceptual model of how work can change to go after outcomes that you could hardly imagine previously, right? In fact, Kevin Scott has this nice line, right, which is when you can make the impossible, when you're making hard things easier, that's sort of one point of leverage. But true ambition is about making the impossible possible. So now the thing that is missing a little bit in all of our organizations is what is that new conceptual model of what can we build? What was impossible and what can we build? And I'll give you one example of this, right, which is I take great inspiration from sort of the people who were managing the Azure network. And they came to this was from even last year. We were scaling. You saw that I talked about sort of how we built in the last 15 months more Azure capacity than we built in the first 15 years. It's crazy.
Wild, yeah.
Right? It's pretty wild. And it's the same team. So they saw that and they said, Bob, this just ain't going to work if we don't reconceptualize our work. So they built, essentially they said, our job is not to do Azure networking. Our job is to build the agentic system that does Azure networking, right? These are the folks managing the 500 plus fiber operators managing the WAN, right, all over. And fiber operations ultimately is a physical operation. Things get cut, things get, have to be repaired. We have fancy words called DevOps and so on. Basically, emails are coming in and you got to go respond to them, take care of it. So they built this agentic system. They even have a character for it. It's called Miles and it sort of does all this stuff, right? They started sort of screaming for more tokens and so on. And so they were saying, look, we don't need headcount. We need tokens in order to be able to manage our operation. That reconceptualization of what their work is, right? They basically took their work and made it meta, right? That meta work is now their new work, right? In the